Okay,
I promise.
everyone, this is Andrew Wood, and he's going to take it away.
Hi, folks. I am Andrew Wood, and I have an interesting dilemma, a ruin, one could say. For reasons that we have not quite worked out, the ability to share my screen with you via Zoom is not functional, and I think that's rather delightful because it illustrates a larger set of challenges that we're going to confront when we talk about the rhetoric of ruins. And that is that while I would like very much to share with you images, I'm going to have to do something that folks have done for thousands and thousands of years, and that is tell stories. So I want you to do me a favor. I want you to envision yourself sitting around a campfire. And as you're sitting around the campfire, I want you to look up at the stars and think about how people for all of human civilization have confronted in the darkness, without the tools and the resources. They have confronted the solitary reality that at a certain point they are alone. And the irony of this is that right now I'm looking at a green dot without the standard supports of images and backgrounds and technology. I'm looking at a green dot, and I'm hoping that I am actually talking to human beings. And what's interesting is I may never know whether I am or not, but I will persist and we will proceed. So without images, I'm going to have to tell you some stories and paint some pictures, and I hope you'll allow me to share them with you. And I want you to do your part in this. And I want you to project the words that I struggle to share with you into images. I'll give you some tools, I'll give you some references, but you're going to have to do some work too so we can get through this together, okay? My presentation is called The Rhetoric of Modern Ruins, Exploring Sites of Dark Tourism. And in order to bring you more fully into this ruin of a presentation, or shall I say a presentation on ruins, maybe both, I want you to now position yourself in Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan, as you know, I don't want to be pedantic, but so we're on the same page. Turkmenistan is largely desert. It is in Central Asia, in the former Soviet Union, and it is a police state. And so you and I are sitting in a desert. We are sitting in the Darvaza Desert next to a hole in the ground. And in a delightful and years developed presentation, I have an image, but right now you just have to see it in your head. You are now looking at me standing in front of a pit set aflame. What brought us here? Why? Well, first of all, we arrived in Ashgabat, in the capital city. That if you're trying to visualize Ashgabat, I want you to imagine that you're in Las Vegas turned into marble, and it is a marble city in the desert. You know that we're in a police state. Okay, that means that we're not allowed to walk around without being checked out. If we leave the city, we have to have a guide. I've been to North Korea. It's a little bit more Stalin-esque there. I've lived in Belarus. It's a little less Stalin-esque there, but it is absolutely an authoritarian environment. Okay, but we are going to escape that with our guide and our driver. And so we drive north about 160 miles further into the desert, and we've come a long way. And what are we here to see? This flaming fire in the middle of wilderness. Now, we got to go back in time. 1971, you had an industrial accident, perhaps like some of the presentation that we're having now, an industrial accident. What happened was some construction equipment fell, and it set loose a release of methane. And the methane gas, the engineers figured, was very likely to kill villagers nearby. And so in a fit of Soviet era optimism, they set it aflame. And they said, what we'll do is, in setting the methane aflame, we'll release the gas, we'll kill the gas, we will solve the problem. What could possibly go wrong? Well, What could go wrong was they set forth a fire that has been burning to this very day. And now you have people like me who invoke through a privilege of academic privilege, touristic privilege, racial privilege, class privilege. You have people who benefit from an infrastructure of dark tourism. Now, there we are. We're surrounded by desert and we're looking into the flames. Now, what I'm about to talk about is going to be what I would call a trigger warning. And I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Over the next minute or so, I'm going to talk about suicide. And if you feel that the discussion of suicide brings forth personal pain or anxiety, I promise you I'll keep this part very short. And I also want to affirm to you that I am well, I'm healthy, and I hope that you are well and healthy. And so this discussion of suicide is somewhat abstract, but it's also deeply personal. Because what happens next is that I now alone, staring into this green dot, I feel that feeling right now, staring into the flames, I found myself thinking, what would it be like to jump? What would it be like to jump into the fire? Now, I want you to visualize, this is about 260 feet wide, 100 feet in depth, okay? So you're looking into this thing. You're looking into the flames, and I want you to feel something with me. We don't have the power of Prezi or PowerPoint. We don't have any of that stuff. All we can do is use our words and our minds to paint this picture. So paint it with me. Imagine looking into the flame and feeling for the first time in your life, your iris is expanding and contracting. You know that when your irises expand and contract on a regular basis, you generally don't feel it, but at this particular moment, you really feel it. You really feel it. It feels almost like your eyes are gritty and the expansion and contraction is a mechanical feeling. Now let's go back to the moment. You're standing there and you're thinking, as I thought, how easy it would be to jump. You're a happy, healthy, protected person in a touristic environment, and you're actually imagining jumping into the flame. Why? I asked my daughter about it when I came back. This is 3 years ago. And I asked her, how would you account for this feeling? My daughter's a counselor, and she works with people who have autism. And she said, well, in my training, we learned about something called l'appel de vida. L'appel de vida means the call to the void, that sense of being inspired to leap into nothingness. And that's really the theme of what I want to talk about, is the call to the void. The rhetoric of ruins is a desire to encounter and manage the anxiety of the void that surrounds us.
Andy, people are very confused. They, I don't know, they say they weren't all in at the beginning.
Sure. You want a brief summary? Oh, we can do this. All right. So, former broadcast journalist here. I'm used to starting at a certain time, and I would hope that I could just tell this story. And what I'm doing is I'm giving you a very lengthy setup for what will be a material and practical discussion about the rhetoric of ruins. And in order to do that, I want to tell you a story about why the ruin is not just about a mechanical, physical, material thing. Like you and I, when we go to the American roadside and we take a picture of a building, we take a picture of a ghost sign, we take a picture of a zombie mall, and we think, I don't know, there's an aesthetic quality. It's beautiful, it's interesting, it's historical. The story that I'm going to try and tell you tonight, without all the tools that I'm used to using, is that it also is about our feeling of anxiety and our desire to manage that anxiety in a manner that is associated with a topic with which many of us are probably familiar, dark tourism. Now, someone asked me, Andy, what are you talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is, let's talk about American ruins. We're going to talk specifically about, I think we should go to Detroit. I have some great images, but I'm going to have to just paint mental images for you. And we're going to go to Centralia, Pennsylvania. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about Chernobyl, depending on time. So because this is going to be apparently a little bit more interactive than I intended, did my answer make any sense? Like Carol, for instance. Carol's got, what is that, a cat or a dog? Carol? And that's a beautiful cat. Carol, I know that I'm an academic and I talk too much, but did what I just say make a little bit of sense? We're going to talk about the rhetoric of ruins. We're going to talk about Detroit. We're going to talk about Centralia. Did the work for the cat? That's important. Let's see, let's look at a couple of other folks. Nick Gerlich. And I haven't met you yet, but you've got a really cool backdrop. Nick, your audio's on. What's the backdrop behind you, Nick?
That should be the abandoned general store in Wildorado, Texas.
Nick, my friend, welcome to my world of it should be. I have a should be that is absolutely burning in my mind. Well, when Nick, you go to an abandoned general store, why would you, and that's, by the way, I'm not an expert, but I look at that photo, I see the tire, I see the materiality of the brick. I see tell me why you took that picture and why it matters to you, Nick.
It looked like everything I imagined the Dust Bowl to be. I live out here near Amarillo, so Wildorado is just 15 minutes west of town, and I was just out with my camera one day, snooping around off 66 a few blocks, and stumbled upon this little store that served this little town that never had more than a couple hundred residents. And most Route 66 travelers never ever saw this, and to this day most don't. But it just struck me as a scene straight out of the Grapes of Wrath, if you will. I know it sounds cliche, but I really liked it, and so I shot it. I rendered it in black and white, and I've used it as a backdrop quite often now during the COVID era. Yeah,
and I'm a fan with you of Route 66. If I love this moment, I think you were very gracious with me with sharing that with me. If I were not so happy, though, I would look away and I would show you the famous Life magazine photo from Seligman, Arizona, of you know what I'm talking about, and the guy holding out his thumb, and you see those big white puffy clouds overhead, and that sense of isolation. But when you refer to the Dust Bowl, you refer to Steinbeck, you refer to the Mother Road, what is the use? And by the way, friends, those of y'all who are still with me, I'm abandoning my plan and we're going to just go interactive. Let's just roll with it. What is the use, Nick, of ruin? I mean, you said it spoke to you. The question I want to ask you is, what is the use of the ruin? Why do we seek after ruins?
And mostly, I feel like I'm transported back into an earlier, much earlier era. Right. And I try to picture myself if I were in the 1930s or the 1940s. I try to look, see, smell, do everything I can to experience the past in the present.
Right.
It's a feeble substitute, I know. We can only do so much, but at the same time, to me, it's a real, almost a spiritual moment to be able to put myself into a place like that and become one with it just for a few minutes.
And that idea of being here, because I'm drawn from you, that idea of being here, but also putting yourself in the past. Do you find yourself being in one or the other or both?
I think I flip back and forth, unfortunately. My students will attest to that because like today in my class, I was in the present, and then all of a sudden I flipped over and I was in the past, and they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? And then I realized I was off somewhere in the 1920s. And then all of a sudden I'm back in 2021, 95 years later.
Now, in a moment, I want to hear from Peter about Peter's experience. And Peter's like, why are you bothering me? I'm just sitting here. But Peter, just fair warning, I'm coming to you. Now, I don't know if you were here for my introduction. What a hot mess that was. But remember I was telling you about the irises flickering, opening and closing? You reminded me of the idea of being both here and there, what some folks call pluritemporality, being in surrounded by ghosts. My argument, feeble as it is that we are in the ruins surrounded by ghosts, but ghosts of what? And I'm going to ask Peter to help me out here. I have a proposal of an answer, but Peter, I want to ask you, what do you think is the meaning of the ghost that we see in the ruin? Is it just a snatch of history, or is there some deeper theme to it? Peter, what do you think? And don't forget to turn your audio on. Peter, my friend, you definitely want to make sure your audio's on because we want to hear your wisdom. So while Peter is finding the audio, and believe me, I've been there. Oh, tonight is the night of technical problem. Peter's on. Yeah. Let's hear it, my friend.
Sorry about that.
We're good.
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so I'm surrounded by many ancient ruins of the indigenous peoples in pueblos, Chaco Canyon, that kind of thing, Bandolier. On the other hand, there's a lot of more current ruins, which are, say, in the northeastern part of the state during the, that was hit very hard by the Dust Bowl. So Mr. Gerlich will recognize that. Right. Pretty close to Amarillo, actually. Right. And you get more modern ruins there. You get a lot of abandoned towns, and sometimes there's nothing but foundations left. So as far as the indigenous people go, though, they have a very deep spiritual connection with the land. And so I think they do definitely have a sense of their ancient ancestors being present in some form. But I'm not that great an anthropologist, so I couldn't go into, good detail on that. But I'm attracted by both facets, the ancient and the modern. That's one thing I really love about where I live, is the sort of proximity of these two types of ruins and everything in between, of course. 19th century ruins when the Anglos came in, and then the Hispanic ruins when the Hispanos, Mexicanos came up from Mexico to take this land for Spain at that time. Right. So there's a whole kind of a staircase historically of various types of ruins. And of course, one thing I like about the roadside landscape, whether I'm driving up in New England or down in the South or in the Northwest or wherever, Canada or somewhere, is try to notice the cultural variations of their kind of ruins. One time I was up in Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and there was these wonderful old iron ore and copper mills and things like that. It was just kind of beautiful in a way. I had some ancestors that came from that area, so I had a little bit of a touch of that. Yeah.
In a moment, and by the way, I want to share a thought that you inspired, and then I'm going to ask Carol Lynn to weave in here. And Carol Lynn's like, what do you bother me for this? But I want to hear from Carol Lynn in a moment. Let me propose at least one argument, the argument that I built part of this presentation around, and that is that the ruin is Jeremiatic. Okay, and we're borrowing from the Hebrew Bible, Jeremiah, who lamented, and in lamenting reminded us that things were better and now they're bad. And I suspect that in ruins, we find a way of critiquing things today. And when we're talking about being in two places at once, we're saying, here I am, and here surrounding me, the ghosts of what used to be. And sure, life was hard back then. But I think that also we find in that difference the awareness that things may have been better, and that the ruin is a reminder that our confidence, like the confidence that I'm going to get up and do a show with my Prezi presentation, that confidence gets blown away. And that the ruin is a reminder that the modern project really didn't fulfill itself, or better yet, maybe it fulfilled itself too much. Carol, what do you think? What is the attraction of the ruin? What draws you to ruins, either ancient or modern?
Are you pointing me towards my thesis that we worked on?
Well, as it just so happens, Carol actually wrote a thesis on motels and mom and pop motel architecture along Monterey Road in San Jose. And so I think you have a lot of insight. I'd love to hear.
I did, and this is actually bringing me back quite a bit, which is amazing. The roadside architecture, I mean, specifically along Monterey Road, is really interesting, and the historical aspect of that is. But you mentioned being in two places at once. Right. Going down, and I'm thinking back. I mean, this is what, almost 20 years, 16 years in the making. Sure. I'm thinking back to just driving up and down Monterey Road, looking at the architecture, studying it. And placing it in an area where it's, I mean, there's obviously competing competing forces. There's historical and there's, you know, what's going on currently. So I think what you're talking about is awesome. And it is bringing me back, which is kind of amazing. And I admittedly to everyone in the room, I haven't actually focused on that in, you know, 15 years or so in my career, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to just listen to your brilliance and your expertise.
Oh, well, let's abandon any pretense of brilliance. Here's the deal, friends. At some point, I had this grand vision of talking with you about the philosophy of ruin. Not going to do that. The story of memento mori, you know, remember thou art mortal, and that the ruin is a reminder of our hubris, that we could lose it all at any moment. I'm not going to waste any more time on that. I was going to talk about, you know, philosophy as the preparation of death, and not going to do any of that stuff. Let's go to Detroit. You want to go to Detroit? Who's Dean? I don't know you, my friend, but I know that you've got a cool backdrop, and I want to hear from you. What do you think of Detroit as a site of American ruin? What does Detroit mean in the American identity? Dean, I genuinely want to know, what do you think? Dean is contemplating. And by the way, I call people out, but I don't have to. I'd love to hear from Roger or Richard Davis.
Dean has his own technical difficulties tonight.
You know what, Dean, you and I are going to go out for a virtual coffee after this, because I'm with you. I'm with you.
He has no audio.
Well, you know, I imagine a couple of folks might wish I didn't have audio either. Richard Davis, you have a backdrop. Maybe you've stepped away to grab a beverage. But if Richard is here, or if Carol wants to come in, Carol, what do you think? Have you visited Detroit as a ruin, and have you thoughts about it?
You talking to me?
I'm talking to you.
There are two Carols, so I wasn't sure who you were talking to.
Carol,
at least two, maybe more.
Yeah.
Carol with a cat?
Carol with the cat.
Okay, Carol with a cat. I have not been to Detroit, but I have friends who go to Detroit regularly, and I have seen a lot of pictures of Detroit.
Right.
And to me, it is a shell of a place that once ran with the power and energy of kind of the US might of the 50s and 60s.
Yep.
And did not keep up with the world as it was changing, and the energy crisis and small cars. And it just, everything flowed out of Detroit, leaving it with a shell. Although, from what I understand, there are incredibly wonderful parts of Detroit still left, and people are now kind of coming back and sort of resettling, at least in a mental sense, resettling Detroit and trying to make it revitalized, and you know, small Etsy, if you will, kinds of mom and pop operations to rebuild, which is a completely different vision from what it was before. That's my sense.
And I'm glad I asked for your sense, and you inspired, and I'm not, you know, I'm not good with names, but I believe Billy made a comment in the chat. I'm afraid to look at the chat. I'm not going to read the chat, but I think that Billy said something about being in Detroit over the summer. Billy, did you want to, because I got a thought, I'm going to share a thought, because, you know, I should offer one, but I want to hear, based on what you said, Carol. Billy, did you want to add in either on chat or orally?
I mean, I was just in Detroit back at the beginning of July, and I tend to photograph a lot of ruins and things, so I went to the old factories, the old Fisher Brothers factory, the Ford Piquette plant, which isn't a ruin, but that whole the Piquette Avenue area is all very old factories falling apart. But then I drove around a lot of other parts of Detroit, and the abject poverty in a lot of those areas, and this wasn't just like the ruin porn of the factories that were falling apart, but it was that like burnt out, bombed out houses in a lot of that are still floating around in some parts of Detroit. And I felt terrible about being there, just like driving down a street like this.
Right.
And a number of years ago, I was driving through a Mississippi Delta, a little south of Clarksdale, actually south of even south of
Did
that.
you sell your soul to the devil?
No, I did not. I did take photos of that though.
Did you feel voyeuristic?
Yeah. I felt voyeuristic in a way because, and I was in the Mississippi Delta area, even I guess it was south of Greenville actually, but there was a lot of poverty there too, and it felt wrong almost in a way, and the complete opposite of, oh yeah, I love taking these photos with filters and everything else of all these great great ruin porn areas. No, this is actually like lives crumbling almost.
Okay, Billy, the check is in the mail. I'm mailing you a check because you have helped me get on track with some themes I really want to share. Everything that gets right, it's because of Billy. Everything that goes wrong, I'll take the hit. But let's concentrate on a few things he said. First of all, the notion of ruin porn. I'm not trying to talk to you as if you don't know this stuff, but let's be sure we're on the same page. Ruin porn is the aesthetic of urban decay that is experienced through what Billy said is the filter. It is a filter of detachment. It is a filter of control. It is a filter of manipulation. And those of us who haven't spent a lot of time in Detroit, he made reference to the kind of what some folks call the broken tooth neighborhoods, where you will be on a block of empty space and then one or two homes that haven't been burnt or blown out. And then you find yourself having to be like William Gibson in the Gernsback Continuum, trying to photograph absence. You're photographing emptiness. You're photographing guilt. Let me tell you a brief anecdote. So I'm doing that. I'm trying to take pictures of what isn't there. An African-American fellow comes up to me and he says, son, what are you doing? And I say, well, I'm taking pictures. And I swear to you, he says to me, yeah, you're taking pictures, but what are you giving back? And I really had no reasonable answer to him. The idea is that ruin porn is very much drawn from the nature of pornography itself. And aren't you glad I don't have visuals for this part of the lecture, in which you have an attention to consumption without a concern for production. What produced the structure that led to the ruin? We're detached from that. Billy knows this as well. We now can have our filter, we can have our displacement. Now, how many of you all have been to the Heidelberg neighborhood in Detroit, where you have Tyler Gyree, who has tried in the eastern side of Detroit to recreate an optimistic vision that is also a critical vision. So let me just ask, is anyone, and you can use the raise hand feature or you can just wave your hand, but has anyone been to the Heidelberg neighborhood? And if not, I'll tell you just a little bit about that, if I may. So I've seen some shaking heads. No one's like, dude, I'm ready to go. Yes. Oh, who said yes, I have? Now I'll go ahead and open up the chat. Karen, or is it Karen? Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing. Karen, hook me up. What's your experience with Heidelberg?
Yes, it's Karen. Can you hear me?
And I'm glad I can. Karen, it's yours. The world is yours.
Yeah, I went to grad school at the University of Michigan in urban planning. So we did spend a lot of time in Detroit.
Yeah.
So yes, I've been to the Heidelberg a couple times, that neighborhood, just to see, at times it's really fascinating. It's a lot of what some people, I guess, would consider, discarded items attached to a lot of the old structures. So art to some and perhaps not art to others, but yeah. So, and I think it's changed over time as well. I think I was there 20 years ago and then maybe 2 years ago. And I think a lot of it, I don't know if the artist is actually still alive. I assume he is, but it has changed and morphed over time. And I guess most interestingly, I think some people in the neighborhood are proud of it. And it does bring people to the neighborhood, but I don't necessarily think it's brought a lot of economic development, let's say. So.
Yeah, and again, and thank you, by the way. Speaking to a Detroiter or someone who has been educated there, I feel the absurdity of me trying to tell you what you already know. But you're right that there's now a Heidelberg 3.0, where many of the homes have been dismantled or have been defaced, because when you see home, what you're seeing is they paint polka dots on many of these houses. There is a Humvee with a tree growing out of it, and the most common motif are clocks. And Tyree Guyton and his friends and family have painted clocks all around. And the question is, why? Why are these clocks all around the Heidelberg neighborhood? And the answer is, he would say, because it's time. And you'd say, time for what? Time for what? And he would say, time for change. There again, the ruin is a critique. It is a means of saying that the present is bad, and we can't have a means of comparison without the ghost of the past poking at us, pushing at us, snapping us into awareness that we live in a world of pluritemporality, that the modern world is not, as Candide said, the best of all possible worlds. It's merely one choice, and it's not even a very good one. So what I want to do is suggest a brief discussion, and we're going to transition to Centralia in a moment. But in our brief discussion of Detroit, what we're talking about is that sense of detachment and guilt that we aestheticize when we take the picture. And, you know, if you read Susan Sontag, taking picture is a kind of theft. And Tyree Guyton is saying, what are you giving back? And as Karen said, and again, I hope I got your name right, Karen has said it hasn't brought back a lot of economic benefit. You have tourists who stay behind their cars, they stay within their vehicles, and they snap pictures and get the heck out of Dodge. Okay. I'm going to keep an eye on time because I know that y'all probably have commitments to be somewhere else in about 20 minutes. So let's shift to one other ruin. And I'm going to ask, and particularly people who haven't had a chance to weigh in on this, I want to prepare us to talk about Centralia, Pennsylvania. And those of you who are writers and those of you who are lovers of the roadside, I think you'll really dig this. All right, first of all, let's do a little bit of preview. And I feel embarrassed if I'm telling you something you already know, but Centralia, Pennsylvania coal mining country. Michael knows the score. And Michael, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this in a second. But just to, you know, what we're talking about is another industrial accident. Oh my God, is Andy going to talk about Turkmenistan again? No. But similarly, you had a coal seam fire that got lit and just never seemed to get put out. And I've got these really great overhead view images and Billy, I want to hear from you too, but I think I'm going to hear from Michael first because we haven't heard from him in a second. That you now have a city that was about 1,500 people that as of 2019 had 10 human beings living there. And again, similarly, people drive by, they take their pictures, they leave. Now, in a second, and by the way, I'm going to give you a fair warning. We're going to get a little weirdly theoretical in a second, but let's stay practical. Okay, let's stay practical first. Imagine yourself writing about Centralia. And what's the first thing you do? You write about something called Graffiti Highway. Michael, I'm going to ask you, can you describe for those of us who have not been there, Michael, what is Graffiti Highway?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a ghost town when you find yourself in Centralia, but then I guess I was told where I could see the highway. So that, there's kind of a highway that bypasses this piece of highway that right. They decided to condemn or whatever. And then, we stopped and tried to walk on it. And then, when I was there, it was a really hot day and we were kind of spooked about, what are there gases coming up out of the highway that we can't see or smell, So we didn't go very far on it, but I've heard it's since been covered over. So
that's my story. All right, so I'm going to add one little detail. All right, it's about 3/4 of a mile. You're right. It used to be the main road out of town. Now they've diverted around it. Our Route 66 friends know that story all too well. And yet it's been covered with layers and layers of time, where someone comes and leaves a sign that says, I was here. And this is another thesis, and I didn't invent this thesis. Kristen Somerville says, what's the purpose of graffiti? The purpose of graffiti is to say, I was here. Okay, and you're like, really, Andy? You need to tell us that? But I want you to think about the difference between I was here and I am here. All right, go back to those old medallions, right, where someone would say, and it would be an enslaved person, and he would say, "Am I not a man and a brother?" All right, and then Sojourner Truth says, "Ain't I a woman?" And then in the 1968 Memphis garbage workers strike, people with those signs, you can see them, right? I am a man. And can you see the sign? It doesn't just say I am a man. The word am is underlined. This is present tense. I am here. The ruin is saying,
like, it's like visiting a volcano, maybe, though. It's, dangerous. Is it dangerous to visit? That's why I thought, wow, that, this is such a great tourist attraction for this poor ghost town, that it has a tourist attraction, and maybe that would help it, but maybe it was just that there was this danger of some underground fire that was going to come back.
And so there are two dimensions here going on. All right, the business of danger. I wasn't going to go there yet, but I'm going to go there now because of what you said. Yes, you are right that Pagnotti Enterprises, the folks who own the land, bulldozed over it last April. And in so doing, they covered it with about 2 feet of dirt. And so now you can't even see the ruin. The ruin is ruined. Now imagine yourself in my case. All right, you're a writer, and many of you are writers. And you've written this really great chapter about Graffiti Highway in Centralia. And then some SOB comes and covers the whole thing and says, guess what? Your whole chapter no longer makes any sense. Just like your whole presentation doesn't make any sense because there's no video to go with it. And you go, okay, I'll turn that into a virtue. That is the ruin of the ruin. But let's focus on what you said, Michael. And that's the business of danger. All right, I was going to talk about like Chernobyl later on, but I don't think that's really relevant. I suspect that part of the pleasure of the ruin is to encounter danger in a manageable way. Mm-hmm. To say, yeah, there are, because, okay, bear with me. Let me just give you a nickel's worth of Chernobyl, all right? If in terms of ruin porn, the money shot is someone with a radiometer showing that the reading is pegging. And they're saying, oh, look at the radiation coursing through my body. And of course, that's the shot. Dom Joly wrote a book about dark tourism, and he talks about people complaining, I'm not getting irradiated enough. And so the idea is that we seek a kind of managed encounter with mortality. Look, I know I sound like I'm trying to be a big shot, but let's think about that. The ruins are about our management of anxiety, not about our encounter with anxiety. And that when we take a picture at a distance, we can say, I was here, not I am here. The here-ness is a temporary thing. The photograph is the thing we're seeking. Now, I have a couple of other thoughts, but I want to hear from, Richard Davis is bringing it. Richard says that when we photograph ruins, we are taking pictures of ghosts, the ephemeral, ethereal, lingering images of ghosts of non-human entities. They portray what was once alive and portend death, theirs and ours. Why the hell am I talking? Richard's got it going on. Ruins are a sort of time machine. We can imagine what once was, and we see them in transit to their final demise. We are caught between life and death, and we are suspended in time. Richard, I owe you a Coke. Richard, my friend, have you been to Bodie, California? I'm not trying to, call you out, but
yes, I have.
My God, Richard, what are your thoughts on Bodie?
So my experience of getting to Bodie is 1973. I drove a Volkswagen Beetle that I converted into a camper and spent 5-6 months on the road. I was in Yosemite and wanted to get over to there because I had a Sierra Designs catalog that was shot in Bodie. A snowstorm blocked me from getting out the east portal of Yosemite, and it took me something like 10 or 11 hours to make a huge loop through snowstorms. And I pulled into Bodie, blanketed in snow under a full moon. I spent the night there. I got in at midnight and spent the night there sleeping in my car, and spent the next day photographing and just experiencing Bodie. And and it's that suspended animation. It's not, everything is ephemeral. Everything is going to be gone. It doesn't matter. I mean, the pyramids, give us some more time, they're gone. All of us are gone. And it's that moment where you can look left and you can look right. You can see what they once were. You can see the glory and the beauty and the potential. And then you look the other way where there's nothing left. And Bodie was absolutely, I'm glad you mentioned it. I haven't thought of Bodie for a while, but Bodie absolutely brings that on.
Now, I don't know if you've done this because I mean, by the way, that image, and I don't remember the exact words you said, but your description is so vivid, and it really, really gives me chills that you're sharing that with us. And I'm not BSing you. You really, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm wondering if you remember looking into the glass, because that's one of the Bodie experiences.
Oh, absolutely. But you know, the thing is, what was beautiful about Bodie was it was not being preserved. Now, remember, this is 1973.
Right.
And in 1973, it was left in a state of
Arrested decay.
Natural decay. They weren't. So, I mean, you could look through. I remember next to the mortician, there were half-built caskets sitting, you know, outside. The general store had this unbelievable. I mean, like, you know, treasure hunters would find there was a coffee grinder, a huge coffee mill. I mean, it was like somebody said, you know, 10 o'clock in the morning, okay, everybody get on the bus and we're leaving. And they just left things behind.
Right.
And that's what makes it so compelling, is it's not fake. It's not, you know, it has no, you know, preparation or restorative qualities. I don't know what it looks like now. I have no idea, and whether they've let it just continue in that decay. But yeah, I mean, there were ghosts there for sure. And I don't mean, you know, anything spooky. It was just that, you know, it had a life, but it was in transit. It was that in-between state to me.
I think that the really visceral, practical, vivid description that you said is going to buy me a moment of theory that people won't just throw rocks at me. But there is a word that I want to share with you, and it's called hauntology, not ontology, but hauntology. And the basic argument is that we are the ghosts, that we are the ones that are needing to be reminded that we're not really here. And that when we go to a place like Bodie and we look in the glass, we see our reflection. And this is what all Bodie tourists do, is they end up staring into the glass and they see themselves, but they also see the sky behind them. They see the objects in front of them. They see multiple times simultaneously. And it's really hard to experience that in other places. To answer your observation about what's going on now, yes, they are still maintaining arrested decay. They try to use period style structures and tools and devices. They'll use the type of glass. They get the glass in from Germany because it has similar properties. But if it starts to fall, they'll put up something to try and keep it up. But if it falls, they're going to let it go. And so as SCA devotees, if you haven't done so yet, I hope that a trip is arranged to go to Bodie. There are guides, there are park rangers, but mostly this is the best thing. It's you wander on your own and tell your own story. Now, Jeremy is noting that arrested decay is such a fascinating preservation treatment that allows for the passage of time to be represented. Now, Jeremy, I'm gonna steal a moment from you because you inspired me in what we already talked about. I swear, I'm not trying to sound like a philosopher, but in Bodie, I swear this is true. There is a quote from Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, and it literally says that one can never step twice into the same river. And Bodie is about saying you aren't here. You are in between past and present. You aren't in one moment. And so Jeremy adds that Eastern State Penitentiary is a really compelling example, an educational tourist attraction and art gallery. You need to sign a waiver to get into. Jeremy, would you turn on your mic and tell us a little bit more about this?
Hey, yeah.
What you got, man?
I just remember, yeah, the first time I'd ever been in at Eastern State Penitentiary, just found it super fascinating, the way that they had used the space. I mean, really place-based art. I remember them talking about ghosts of the past. They had art of sculptures of cats, I remember, around, because the place had been inhabited by cats for many years in between when it was occupied by the prisoners and when it was reopened. So it's really kind of, again, calling attention to the fact that there is time that passes between when a building is created and built and the present. And so often I work in preservation, and so often what we are doing is trying to recreate and sometimes imagined vision of perfection when things were originally created and everything was perfect and no change ever happened. And this treatment, I think, is unique in that it acknowledges that time passes and that is okay.
You dropped some truth bombs here. By the way, Richard reminds us that Bodie in its day was it was hell, and it was called a shooter's town, and there was the 19th century, the quote unquote bad man from Bodie. The truth is that Bodie had its share of violence, but it was also a rhetoric of violence, that there were a fair number of murders, but it wasn't quite as bad as it was made out to be. And again, it's that encounter with danger, that touch of death, that we seek after places that put us not in mortal danger, but in a rhetorical danger, that ability to play with death, like the ability to stand in front of the fire and imagine leaping in. So what I'm noticing is that it's 5:54. And, you know, I'm going to tell you, I think that we've made some progress in working through an idea, but we're not done. This is a lifetime conversation. But let me give you a couple of thoughts that I'd like to see where I'd like to summarize an idea. And then I want to invite some people to share thoughts, push back, let me know what I'm missing. So let me do this part super quick. The argument that I've struggled to make, and you've been very, very patient with helping me make it, is that ruins are material, okay? We're looking at objects in the world. This is true, but ruins are also rhetorical. They are made to persuade, that we allow ourselves to imagine a better world or a different world or an alternative world, and that ruins are structures of meaning that allow us to ask questions that we don't ask in other places. It's really hard to ask questions in an airport. The design is so totalizing, you're just kind of forced to act. But when you go to Bodie, you can kind of struggle with your own mortality and play with it and manage it. And what I'm hoping to propose is that in a world that seems so mechanized and so sort of medicalized, the real encounter of the moment of looking into the flame, looking into our mortality, ruins provide us that safety valve, and we need them. And so I want to hope that when we travel the highways and byways of the America, but also of the world, that we take our share of pictures, we collect our souvenirs, it's fun. And we go to a diner and struggle over who's going to get the cherry pie and who's going to get the last cup of coffee. But we also ask ourselves, can we not consider that quiet moment of the ruin as a means to asking ourselves who we are when we're not present and what will we leave behind? Because memento mori means remember, you are mortal. And I think that we need to remind ourselves of that, even though we're surrounded by real stress and frightening era of the pandemic. But we always carry with us that hope that, well, not me. The ruin humanizes us and humbles us. And now tonight, I feel especially humbled for the chance to share this with you. I'm gonna let Michael run the show in terms of how long we do this, but does anyone want to add an additional thought or comment or question? I could stick around for another couple minutes, but it's not about me. It's about if anyone wants to add something. Let's chat for just a couple more minutes. Is there anything that we're missing?
I say something?
Please.
I wrote it in the chat, but I think it's pretty fitting that in Centralia, that other than these few houses that are standing and the fire department building, that the only real structures left are cemeteries.
I saw that.
And I mean, I walked around all of that area, and it's sad in a big way, because I mean, I saw obviously empty spaces. I saw the farmer, one farmer on a tractor going back and forth, or maybe a lawnmower, not a tractor, going back and forth there, and he's the only person I can see all around me. It's interesting, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Another similar thing is on Long Island, where I'm from. Kings Park is a former mental facility, and there's it's a bunch of buildings that are now part of a state park. And I mean, there's all the, oh, it's haunted type of stuff there. And I've photographed all those buildings all around there. And I've taken people up there for haunted tours. But at the end of the day, this is literally where lives were changed in this like almost 100-year, more than 100-year-old mental facility whose main building looks like Arkham Asylum.
Right.
It's question. I don't know how I feel about any of this stuff.
Well, no, but you've offered us a lot to think about. I'm grateful. I hope that all of us are studying the chat, because what a lot of people are doing is also suggesting other sites worthy of study. And I'm not the one to recommend this. I'm just one of us saying, I hope that in SCA, we will maybe attend to ruins, look for sites of ruin, and consider the aesthetics and the ethics and the philosophy and rhetoric. So at this point, I think that let's go ahead and call it a day. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm proud that we kept together and we made it work. I think that this conversation was worthwhile, and I'm truly grateful for your participation and for your willingness to let me share a few of my thoughts. I wish you a happy evening. I'll stick around if anyone wants to visit with me. I'll have to catch a bus fairly soon, but I'll stick around for a couple of minutes. In the meantime, we'll call it a day or an evening, wherever you are. And I'll see you down the road to ruin. Thank you very much.
Well, can we just say that maybe you can come back sometime and we can, figure out the presentation thing?
You know what? I sure, we can do that. But, I'm just speaking frankly. I came in all philosophical and academic, and I don't think that's useful. I think that I'd really rather just talk and share and compare on places we got to go. And maybe we could gather together some smaller presentations based on some of the things that people mentioned in the chat. And I can share a few of mine, but I'd rather also hear from y'all too. So just a thought. I'll come back anytime, but I also know I'm not the only one here to teach something.
Andy, I dropped this in the chat, but I mean, just this talk is having me look at where we live in such a new light, or should I say renewed light from years ago. But yeah, Placerville, fascinating. It's fascinating up here.
Yeah.
And just walking down Main Street, I will definitely be looking at things much, much differently now, even after having lived here for 15 years.
Oh, I hope. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to tell you a little secret. Carol, I'd like to say that I'm super smart, and I asked you because I knew that you'd done this master's thesis.
Yeah.
I forgot. I swear I wasn't
really?
thinking those terms. I'm not going to lie to you. We've had a couple magic moments, and that was one of them. I was like, oh my God, she's where she needs to be.
Yes. That was awesome. Thank you.
It's no joke. Okay, gang. I'm not sure how the host business works. I think that I may be the host, but I think that Michael is also the host. So if I check out, if I leave, I don't think that means that I end the meeting. So y'all can continue the conversation. I'll be having to catch a bus, so just okay. FYI. So Michael, are you still able to say goodbyes if necessary? If I leave, it won't do harm to our meeting?
Yeah, I can say goodbye.
Awesome. Hey, gang, thanks again. And I'm just delighted that we found a way to not ruin our evening together. Bye-bye, y'all.
All right. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.